Okay, well, good evening, everyone. It's great to see a full house on our Garden Cities Planning and Zoning Commission regular meeting for Wednesday, September 21st, 2022. The record can show that Commissioners Shepherd, Brown, Montoya are present. Commissioner drawing a blank. Wow. Mr. Wild, Commissioner Wild, I drew a blank on his last name. My goodness. Commissioner Wild is not present this evening. All right, so let's do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, for the staff, any changes to the agenda?
Chairman, no changes by staff. One item to note, though, I do believe that staff is going to request to take conditional use, to hear conditional use fiscal year 2022 number 14 and rezone 2022 number 1 all together at the same time and hear them in conjunction.
Okay, that sounds good. And I'll just say, in addition to that, when we get to those for the commission, we'll need to do a motion that contains both those applications. So just wanted to put that out there for us ahead of time. That said, move to the consent agenda. Right now, the consent agenda contains our minutes from our August 17th, 2022 meeting. And also item number B under that, which is subdivision FY 2022-4 Elle Estates. That is being moved to a date certain of October 19th, 2022 due to noticing issues. So far, that's what we have on the consent agenda. There is one other one that potentially could go to the consent agenda. I'm specifically referring to the first item under public hearings, item A, CUP FY 2022-13, conditional use permit application. Troy DeRosier, hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, is requesting a mixed-use studio for social dancing and private lessons located at 5125 and 5137 North Glenwood Street, located in the C2 General Zoning District. So in order to add that one to the consent agenda, there's a handful of questions I ask publicly. It's usually items that aren't controversial, and we have all the materials in order to just apply it or add it to the consent agenda. So given that, I'll ask these questions here. First of all, is there anyone in the audience who would like to give public testimony on that particular item? Again, CUP FY 2022-13.
Chairman, we do have someone that signed up, and Anthony Job or Jobs, Job, noting support of the application. And it sounds like it might be the wrong application.
Okay, so we don't have. So for clarity's sake, then we don't have anyone listed for public testimony for that application. Is that correct? Okay. So we're good there. Is the applicant present for that item? Okay. Please state your name for the record. My name is Troy. Okay. Have you had the opportunity to review the findings of fact, conclusions of law, and draft decision, including draft conditions of approval? Yes, sir. And do you agree and consent to these documents in the affirmative, including all conditions of approval? Yes, sir. Okay, thank you. And the last one, does staff or any member of the commission have any reason that they feel that this item should be heard?
I don't.
Okay. All right, so that said, we will go ahead and add that one to the consent agenda as well. The rest of the items on tonight's agenda, we will proceed with public hearings. Okay, so I believe we are ready for a consent agenda motion.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Brown,
I move approval of the consent agenda consisting of the minutes for August 17th, 2022. Item that was old business number B, which would be subdivision FY 2022 number 4, Elle Estates. And including under public hearings, item number A, CUP FY 2022 number 13, a conditional use permit for Troy DeRosier pertaining to a mixed-use studio.
I'll second the motion.
okay, we have a motion and a second. Everyone in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, and no nays. So our consent agenda is approved. Mr. DeRosier, your item is approved as well. So you're done for the evening. You're welcome. All right, so we'll move into our first hearing item, which is under old business subdivision FY 2022-2 Hunsick Townhome subdivision preliminary plat process as a planned unit development. Jeff Hatch is requesting a residential subdivision consisting of 6 residential lots located at 3900 North Reed Street in the R3 medium density zoning district. So before you come up, sir, I'm just going to go through the hearing format here real quickly. So I will introduce each item as it comes up on the agenda. Then we will have a presentation by the applicant, 15 minutes. City staff report will follow that for 15 minutes. And then we will have a public hearing. Anyone in the public that's signed up can give public testimony on the application with a 3-minute limit. The applicant will be able to provide rebuttal at that point, and then we'll close the public hearing, and then the commission members will chat about the application and come to a decision, and then we'll move on. All right, so that said, Mr. Hatch, if you're here, okay, I just thought that was you. Yep. State your name for the record, please, and address.
Good evening, Chairman Rasmussen and Commissioners. Jeff Hatch with Hatch Design Architecture. Our address is 200 West 36th Street in the fabulous town of Garden City, Idaho. Thank you for your consideration of our subdivision application this evening. I do have a presentation, and do I need to share that, Hannah?
And while that's being pulled up, I'll also mention that this commission, whatever we do here tonight, from our motion, we are recommending action to city council. This is not a final decision here tonight. We're just recommending action by city council. Okay, thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
Understood. So our proposed project location is off of Reed Street, kind of tucked next to Heron Park and also the Boise River. As mentioned, the current zoning is R3. We're not proposing to rezone the property. Future land use also has this as a mixed use residential development. In looking at the adjacent area, we did want to find a project of similar density based on our proposed use, and we were able to locate the 40th Street townhomes that are of a similar density and still in the R3 zone in the general vicinity of our proposed project. Here is our latest site plan and discussion with design review. You'll note that we have our townhomes. We have a common area that has a series of garages as well as a common living space. So if you had individuals who come into the area, family members or guests, they actually have a place to stay on site and enjoy the intimacy of the green belt and what Garden City has to offer. As far as the subdivision's structure, we have 4 designated common lots. We have one for that common garage and common area space. We have one for our common amenities. We have one for our bike rack in this kind of little remnant piece. And then we have one for our pedestrian access easement. Everything else would be the private townhome lots. Part of the design criteria reason for proposing the pedestrian access to the green belt through the center of the property is there are a range of utility infrastructure, and also the sidewalk does not continue to the south on this particular project. As far as the mechanism and condition of approval, we have coordinated with city staff as far as getting permission from the city, who owns that portion of property and is technically part of Heron Park, in order to connect to the green belt. One of the largest considerations in our past PUDs has been the need and desire for a range of different unit types. And so we do have 5 unique and distinct floor plans with 3 and 4 bedroom options for each of those. So as kind of a summary from staff report and findings, I did want to go through a couple items just for consideration. The applicant must demonstrate the proposed development can be achieved within 2 years. And we feel that in talking with the owner, they would be fine with that as a condition of approval. Each individual unit of the development and the total development have to be able to exist in an independent unit capable of creating an environment of sustained desirability and stability. We feel that each individual unit in the total development can exist independently. The residential use is compatible with the R3 and the flume designation. And the use of the PUD allows for a site configuration to accommodate our common open space, our site amenities, our public connectivity to the green belts. And also with that, in our application, we have a request for a waiver for 2 setback reductions, one for the front along the roadway for our common structure with parking, and then one for the rear for a couple of the townhomes themselves. As far as the streets and thoroughfares must be suitable and adequate for carrying anticipated traffic, and in review of our ACHD report, they do recommend approval of our proposed layout with curb cuts and some conditions. As far as commercial development, we do not propose any commercial development, and the nature of the guest house and garage is not of a commercial use. It would be of a residential nature. Any exceptions to the standard districts required are warranted for design and amenities incorporated into the final development. As previously stated, we do have a reduction for the front setback to allow for the common clubhouse and visitor parking, and then a reduction of the rear setback to accommodate for the width of our drive aisle, which was required to be increased based on aerial apparatus requirements by the fire department. So that was where that request came from. The area surrounding the development and planned unit development in coordination with substantial compatibility. And with that, and looking at the R2 zone and flume map, and also some of the more recent developments, such as that 40th Street cottages, we feel that this is compatible with the area. But in addition, we're creating a pedestrian access from the public right of way into the park, into the green belt that doesn't currently exist, which we feel is a fairly substantial improvement to access to this area. And as far as the PUD's general conformance with comprehensive plan, Our planned unit development is compatible with the future land use. It meets the objectives of the comprehensive plan by providing a distinct neighborhood with quality architectural design. The proposed public sidewalk and access to the greenbelt create more access and improve pedestrian connectivity as well as bicycle connectivity. And then lastly, existing proposed utilities are adequate to the site, and we have been able to confirm that as well. With that, I will stand for any questions.
Okay, thank you, sir. Any questions for the applicant by the commission? Commissioner Brown.
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Hatch. I presume that you've read the staff report. It raises an issue of a lack of CCNRs and an agreement on how you would take care of the maintenance of in one place you refer to it as a clubhouse, another one as a guest garage, and a place for guests to stay. How would the maintenance of that be assured in the event that we recommended approval?
Chairman Rasmussen, Commissioner Brown. We feel that having that as a condition of approval to be clearly vetted out through our CCNRs with the city attorney, I think would be an appropriate measure in order to deem that an operational requirement. In talking with the owner, he feels that having that as a common lot area owned by the HOA would be at least the initial intent in order to convey the intent that that's not a privately owned structure, but it is something that is shared and managed by the HOA. It would be clarified in that CCNR.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions by the commission for the applicant? Okay,
Thank you.
thank you, sir. We'll move on to the staff report.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The Design Review Committee recommended denial of this application on Monday, September 19th, 2022, based off of the application's inability to address some of the design standards set forth in Garden City Code, specifically that of Garden City Code 8-4B. They determined that the subdivision lacked overall street frontage presence and that relationship dynamic between the structures, the subdivision, and the public realm. The applicant submitted late materials on September 19th, 2022, which have since been uploaded to the website for the review. But the Planning and Zoning Commission tonight will need to determine whether or not those will be added to the record for today's hearing. Staff has not had the time to thoroughly analyze these late submittals, but in a quick glimpse, there seems to be some questions still that staff has, and a lot of the staff report comments and questions and concerns are still applicable based off of this quick analysis. Those concerns are regarding the preliminary plat layout of the individual lots and the common lots or lack thereof, the guest parking functionality, as well as the guest house functionality, and the lack of CCNRs submitted to the city to understand the operation of this area. The public easement, not only through the subdivision to the greenbelt, but also the easement through the greenbelt or through the landscaping area to the greenbelts. We haven't seen any drafted easements. The city is an owner of part of that land between the subdivision and the greenbelt, to which the applicant would need to enter an easement agreement with to provide that easement to the public. And lastly, a lot of the concerns regarding the subdivision's ability to meet the planned unit development objectives of Garden City Code 86B7 are still of a concern. This application, so subdivision fiscal year 2022-0002, is a subdivision application that is processed as a planned unit development. As a planned unit development, they are able to submit waivers that can or cannot be approved by the commission. There are three waivers in total. There is a waiver regarding the setbacks to allow for an 11-foot front setback and 5-foot rear setback. There's also a waiver regarding the amount of dwelling units that can be accessed off of a common drive, allowing for 8 units to be accessed off of that common drive. And then there is, and the third one. Oh, and then the third one, which is actually needing to be removed based off of the new submitted material. It is involving the 6 covered carports of the previous design. The new design no longer has covered carports. It incorporates a fully enclosed garage. So that third waiver is no longer necessary. And then as far as the decision document goes, I would like to make some corrections. So on page 16, under prior to city signature on plat, number 5. So 5A(I)(1) says front setback 12.5. That needs to be corrected to 11 feet to accommodate for the new setback, front setback waiver request of 11 feet. And then on page 22, under general conditions, number 2 would need to be updated to include the new submitted materials that are now considered late materials, unless of course added to the record here today. So that would need to reflect September 19th plans, to which staff can correct after a decision here today to make sure it's correct. And then number 3 is the waivers. So 3A would just be corrected to 11 feet instead of 12.5, and then 3C would be eliminated. And these corrections are of course drafted in the approval recommendation. So if the commission tonight decides to recommend approval, those corrections would need to be made. If the denial is recommended, then those corrections don't need to be made, and we would just need to go through the findings one by one and make sure that is what the commission has found the denial on. And with that, I stand for questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions for staff?
Chairman.
Yep. Commissioner Montoya.
Thank you. You made reference to some concerns with the PUD code. What are the major concerns in that code specifically that staff has concerns with?
Yeah, so the first one is always a discussion that we have regarding planned unit developments and their variety of housing. So it's not, the subdivision is not technically meeting the actual definition of variety of housing, but based off of practice, we've permitted subdivisions to have multiple floor plan layouts. So that's the first one. The other few are more in regards to meeting the findings of trying to, I'm trying to word it right, preserve the natural landscape and geology. The site is currently proposing to eliminate all the existing landscaping on site, even though some of the existing trees could be preserved if the applicant wanted. And then I have it in the findings of the decision document too. I tried to spell it out. So we get further into the comprehensive plans, goals, and how it's not in conformance with those. And then just, a lot of the discussions with the design review committee and also what staff found, and I can't quote it today, but it was essentially by asking for specific waivers. So for example, their waivers to setbacks, they need to provide a better development. So by asking for these waivers and breaking code, they need to be providing a better development design essentially. So it's a give and take. And that was part of the reason why the design review committee didn't, or they recommended denial, was because they didn't feel that the application was giving enough back to the community. And I'm not quoting them exactly, but the waivers that are being requested here today and the lack of adherence to Garden City Code is basically what is the cause for staff's concerns.
All right, thank you. Follow up.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just to make sure, the first item that you mentioned was the variety of housing, and just to make sure that I'm understanding it, that it
Mhm.
would fall underneath the residential code for with 10 or more dwelling units for requiring a variety of housing, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and then for the landscaping, just making sure, I did read the report that says that there are a few substantial trees, high caliber, that are gonna be removed for the development.
Mhm.
And this could be a question for potentially Mr. Hatch to address later on whether there's any protection that could be involved to try and save some of those, or even if staff would be amenable to mitigation of the removal of the trees based on an equal count, based on the caliber.
Mhm. Yeah, so we could condition the need for an arborist report, which has not been submitted, which has been conditioned, and then working with staff to try and determine which trees would be the easiest to preserve on the site and would make the most sense, especially those that are adjacent to the green belt. Now with the new setback being 5 feet of the new material, it might be a little bit different of a determination, but I do know that there is a tree out front in the common open space pet park area that might be considered viable for preservation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Montoya. Any other questions by the commission? Commissioner Brown?
Mr. Chairman, Hannah, thank you for that report. I have a couple of them to follow on. First of all, in your report, you mentioned a discrepancy that existed at that time. I realized that they have submitted some more stuff that might have changed, and so that is really my question. There was a discrepancy between the landscaping plans that were submitted and the site plans, which were the drawings that you have. Has that been corrected in the late submissions?
Yes, I do believe so, Commissioner Brown.
So that one, second one has to do with the design review committee's concern having to do with the street frontage. Am I correct in assuming the two items that really are addressed there? Number one of them is how much percentage of the frontage that would be on Reed Street, actually on this little cul-de-sac they're gonna make, which would be the driveway. How much percentage of that is represented by garage fronts? And the second item has to do with the fact that there's no, let's call it an indentation or variability, but where the front door is, which originally wasn't there, but it now on each unit's got a front door, but it's at the same level in the building as the garage door. Is that the second item that they're concerned about?
Commissioner Brown, they are concerned about the relative percentage of the overall frontage there on Reed Street being consumed by hardscape, that common drive. And then also the buildings being set back so far from that public right of way. And they are also concerned about the pedestrian walkability of the subdivision. So their connection from the public sidewalk to those front doors, which are flush with the front garages. I can pull up the most recent renderings so that we're not lost. So, Mr. Chairman, right now I am presenting their August 8th submittals. So these are not late submittals, but this is the August 8th submittal packet, the most recent renderings of the homes. We do have more recent schematic drawings, which are in that late submittal packet from September 19th. They essentially, based off of my quick review, are showing the same material. It's just not in a pretty picture as I'm presenting right now.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown. Commissioner Shepherd, any questions for staff?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Rasmussen. I wanted to just clarify or confirm that the open space that they had on their plans is sufficient. And is that if you include all the hard space you just talked about with the driveway?
Right, so the most recent staff report was not able to analyze the common open space. And so it has been conditioned in the decision document in front of you tonight to require that common open space to be compliant with code. Now, staff has a concern with that being a condition because if it isn't code compliant, either in dimensional standards or what qualifies as common open space, it could redirect the subdivision to go back through the entire hearing process to accommodate for that common open space. Now, saying all of that, there has been calculations presented by the applicant as to how much common open space there actually is provided. The site is required to provide 10%. And so long as we reach that 10%, and there is that condition in there, then it would be code compliant, but there is still a condition in front of you tonight.
Thank you. And if you would, very briefly, sorry to ask this, but could you hit me again with the decision document changes, just to make sure we have those?
Yes.
For 100% clarity.
So under the recommendation for approval, on page 16, number 5, prior to city signature on plat,
Yep.
5A1 change from 12.5 to 11 feet.
Okay.
And then on page 22, we have number 2, just needs to be updated to the most recent resubmittal packet, which is considered late at the moment until added into the record. And then number 3 needs to update that 12.5 foot setback to 11 feet, include the rear setback and side setback to 5 feet, and then delete item C under 3C.
Excellent. Thank you very much for doing that again.
Yes, of course.
All right. Thank you for the report. We do have a handful of people that would like to provide testimony. So again, these instances of testimony are 3 minutes per person. So I'm just gonna go through the list here. And then as you hear your name, if you can come up to the podium and state your name for the record. And you'll have 3 minutes to give your testimony. So first on the list is David Jones.
Those are pages for certain hearings because I didn't see any other than blank.
Let's see.
There are.
It's at the top.
Yeah, that one is. Okay.
So they were.
Well, let's, okay, so which, can I just ask you real quickly, which one did you want to? Okay. Okay, all right, great, thank you. The next one then is, let's see. Make sure I'm on the right one here. Okay. All right, my bad. I don't think we have.
Chairman, I believe Colleen Stombach
Yeah.
is the one that.
Okay. Colleen Stambaugh.
Yes.
Okay,
Colleen Stambaugh. I own the property right next to them. On the other side is the park, so I'm the one that's most affected by this property. Unfortunately, I've tried multiple times to get to some of these meetings. They've been canceled at the last minute. I've showed up to have it canceled. So it's been really frustrating for me through the whole season. And I just came across where it looks like they've got 2-foot setbacks from off the property line now. And I don't know if that's a given. But I'm really concerned about that. I've been concerned about the size of the units and how much is development's going on. I own 2 properties on Reed Street. And Violet's Crossing is going next door to one of my properties. And then I have some down by the riverside. So I'm invested in Garden City. But my big concern is this one with its height. And then with that garage along the side of it, it's blocking the whole side of my property. And if you put it 2 feet off my property, it's even worse. I'm basically going to be looking at walls. Originally, I thought that was going to be the owner's garage. So I was surprised to find out it has a guest cottage now. Anyway, so you can understand, I'm a little concerned. I mean, if you start putting 2 feet off that property and I go to develop my property in the future, are you going to allow me to put 2 feet off that one too? And so we've all got 4 feet of space between us. I don't know, you know. Anyway. Yeah, I'm just really frustrated because it still seems like the guest parking is going to overflow into the street. I mean, and a guest cottage, you've got 2,000 and 3,000 square feet. Is that right to these homes? Why on earth do they need a guest cottage for somebody to stay? We're going to have an 18-story hotel down the road and the riverside at the other place. So, and then where are they going to park if they bring a couple cars? So I don't mean to take up your time, but yeah, I'm a little bit upset. And I don't know if that's a given, if they are actually 2 feet off my property line now or not. I saw that in something from January the 27th or something. It says setbacks, we're requesting reduction of the 5-foot setback to 2 and 20-foot setback to 12.5 to accommodate the clubhouse and enclosed visitor parking. And I would like to know really if that's going to turn into visitor parking or if it's going to turn into a private home parking. The parking down on the one, unless it's changed, unit one belongs to the owner, and I thought the garage was going to be the owner's as well. I'm not, I don't want to make bad for bad neighbors, but I'm always already feeling encroached upon. So anyway, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Stambaugh. Appreciate you being here tonight. Next up is Cindy Pettit. If I'm saying that right, or that's here with them also? Yeah. It's okay. Jeff Hatch, you filled out one too. It's okay. Okay, you want to come up? Yeah, that's. Just please name for the record.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Commissioners. Hannah Ball, 215 East 34th Street, Garden City, Idaho. And I live in Village Oak community, which is on 36th Street in Garden City, and it's a NeighborWorks project. And we have a 3-car garage that's owned by the HOA, and it has a storage. It's actually unfinished storage above the 3-car garage that the HOA owns on a common lot. And the HOA pays power. And it's always been underutilized, but the idea and the theory was that that could be a finished space and be used to a small scale development. So that's where the garage theory came from in the community I live in. So I'm in support of this project, and I thought it would be a neat feature to add to a project of this nature. Also, in reviewing this application, I did notice it was a preliminary plat, and possibly many of the conditions could be worked through prior to final plat submittal. I think this is honestly a really great project for this area. And the reason I say that is because I believe it does interact well with Reed Street. And even though code doesn't require a great deal of Reed Street activation, it looks very similar to a project that I have done on 36th Street, my first development, that had a front sitting patio that the neighbors could interact on the street side, they could interact on the greenbelt side, and they could interact on the park side. So even though it's looked at and reviewed as it doesn't meet code standards, I recall my 36th Street development also didn't have it interacted very well with the street side of the development. And every Halloween, those residents actually set up a community gathering area. And so I do like how this project interacts with Reed Street. And I think that community space is allowing neighbors to meet each other on Reed Street, not just on the greenbelt side of the development. I think the height is appropriate to this community. And so I would like to see it approved. Thank you, Commission.
Thank you very much. And unless there's anybody else out there that wanted to, that was the last person I had with paperwork, or the person before Ms. Ball. Anybody else?
Chairman, it does appear that we have somebody on Zoom.
Okay, great, thank you. Let's see, I can't read the name from here. I see the hand raised.
I think it's me. Unless
Okay.
somebody else had their hands raised.
Go ahead and please state your name, and you have 3 minutes, sir.
All right, Jason Jones, 208 East 33rd Street, Garden City, Idaho. I guess I wanted to just make some comments. I've been watching this application go through. I think the staff really kind of did a pretty good job explaining why design review didn't recommend approval for this. And I kind of want to comment because I think it speaks to some maybe problems with city code. Effectively, if you start to look at all the projects that are getting approved on properties similar to this, what kind of happens is you put a drive aisle straight down the middle of the project. The garages feed off that drive aisle, and then you just have townhomes on both sides. That's kind of effectively, like if you look even on Reed Street, Violet's Crossing has done that. The project right next door to Violet's Crossing is doing that. If you look at Adams, that's kind of what all the projects look like. And so they end up being a very generic thing because that's kind of the easiest way to make the code work. And I think, this project, the buildings are, 20 something, 28 feet, 30 feet from Reed Street because of the circular drive for fire access. But I do feel like, when you look at it, it obviously looks like a good project. I think some of the other concerns were that, hey, there's these garages that are visible, and I think if these were single family homes, right now there's single family homes being built that the garages are visible from the street. I mean, there's one right on Adams being built right now, and you can see the garage. There's one on 36th Street that just got built, and the garages face the street. And so there's no code that says the garage can't face the street, but it's supposed to be de-emphasized. And I think this project does a good job de-emphasizing those garages or making the front of those buildings look good. And I think that's why, I think that, planning and zoning should really look at this closely, because this is one of those projects that kind of defies just doing what every other project does. And I actually think we need more of that and not less of it. Because like I said, I think the alternative is that, if these guys are forced to redesign, what you end up getting is a drive aisle down the middle and townhomes on both sides. And it literally looks like two other projects on the same street. And, this circular drive is something that I haven't seen in any projects. It's an interesting take on it. And how to, one, meet fire code and how to meet the code that requires that cars not back into the public right of way. And so it's kind of answering some questions that are code related, but the result is that those buildings get pushed back off the road a little bit to meet those requirements. But I do think that generally speaking, if this gets flipped, let's say this gets recommended for denial and this has to change, I think it's interesting that having just like part of this project face the street, which might just be one townhome on the end of the project while there's a drive aisle, and that one townhome is actually on Reed Street, we would then say, oh yeah, that's now addressing the street. And I think that's the interesting thing about the code.
And I don't want to, sorry to interrupt, but you're nearing the end of your 3 minutes. So if you begin to wrap up.
Hopefully you can kind of look at it and realize that this is something a little different and a little more unique than some of the other projects that are being proposed. So that's kind of what I would hope you guys would be able to look at and do so that it can be recommended. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Anyone else? Okay. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to provide some testimony for this application. At this point, we can bring back up Mr. Hatch to offer a rebuttal.
Chairman Rasmussen, commissioners, thank you again for your time consideration this evening. I'd like to briefly go over a couple of comments and considerations. To Commissioner Shepherd's question about the common lot area. On Monday, we did speak with the design review committee, indicated 13.3%. As a condition of approval that we must meet that minimum of 10%. We feel very confident that we've already justified that, but we can coordinate with staff in order to make sure that that does meet the intent of code. As far as design review, we spent a considerable amount of time, and one of the reasons why we did that is because last time I came to this commission with plan unit development, I had about 13 exceptions, and one of the commissioners wasn't very happy. So I wanted to make sure before I came before you guys, we had a fairly succinct, limited amount of requests. And really, when it comes down to it for design review, that frontage presence or the interpretation of that is really a design review matter, which we would like to state our case to the city council if possible. The staggered entries, addressing the street with the clubhouse and the entry stoops are some of the ways that we've addressed that. But, looking at Heron Park, there is no public sidewalk. There is no public access to that from the street. There's no activation to that park from the street. And we took it upon ourselves to segment our property in order to provide a public access to that parkway. And I think that some of those are the justifications we'd like to present to City Council for that on your consideration. As far as the planning and development, feel that we meet the intent of the variety of housing. As far as preserving the trees, there are a considerable amount of trees along the river frontage as well that are preserved. We feel that we could justify that to City Council with an arborist report, which should easily be generated prior to City Council hearing. We feel that we would be able to identify very clearly which trees have been preserved in order to meet the intent of that code. And then as far as the comprehensive plan and reviewing that, there's a consideration of the street activated presence, the river activated presence along Greenbelt and properties that are adjacent to the Greenbelt. We feel that, taking that pedestrian activity from the public right of way through our project and activating the Greenbelt with that, not only does that for the development itself, but also for the general public. And then lastly, our adjacent neighbor, and to address some of her concerns, she had a concern about the setback. Back in January, we did in fact have a 2-foot setback on the adjacent property based on feedback we got from our neighborhood meeting, as well as from the design review committee. We did increase that to the 5-foot that is required by code. As far as the concern for parking, review of ACHD staff report, they do feel that the density of parking for this development works. In addition to that, part of the complexity that we're requesting as being clearly identified in our CCNRs is the operation of those guest parking stalls. If I go down to Luciano's, might as well just walk from my office down there, or ride a bike, because I'm not going to find a parking space very close to Luciano's. And so if we're going to have guest parking, we want to be able to have the guests actually utilize those on site. So the complexity of having secured guest parking that must be managed and maintained by the HOA is something that the ownership team feels very strongly about, because they want to be able to have that as accessible parking to those guests. If that's something that we need to clearly vet out and identify in our CCNRs, ownership team is more than happy to invest the time in order to do that properly, to make sure that those parking spaces aren't congesting the Reed Street or the public parking. And then the concern for ownership, as far as our common lot exhibit, we intend to have that clubhouse and those parking on the common lot controlled by the HOA, so that it is not owned by an individual and not being mismanaged. With that, I will stand for any questions.
Any questions by the commission for the applicant? Commissioner Brown.
Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Hatch, for addressing those. I have most of the ones I was going to ask have been answered already by what you said, but I do want you to address this issue. You explained the desire of the access to the green belt that will be from your side. There was some concern in the staff report, and as I recall, also by design committee. How will the public out on Reed Street know that there is public access to the green belt through this development?
Commissioner Brown, a great deal of that has been vetted out over the months with design review, including an arbor, including public signage, wayfinding, identifying clear markers and delineation within the driveway for that, and then conditioning that we coordinate with city council and city staff for public access easement, as well as in our subdivision, having a public easement for that access dedicated to the general public from the sidewalk to that green belt.
Okay, that's all I have. Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown. Anybody, any other commissioner with questions? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hatch.
Thank you.
Actually, not at this time. Here. Okay. But thank you and the commission appreciates everyone else taking time to provide testimony on this application. So at this point, we will close the public hearing. And we'll move to a discussion just amongst the commissioners and hopefully come to a recommendation for city council after our discussion. So Commissioner Montoya, you can start the conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, and thank you, Mr. Hatch, for the presentation. I've seen this come through a couple times and be taken back for a number of reasons. And I do remember some of the changes that were made earlier on, especially with the carports and then the changes to the front. So I can see how you're making an attempt on a pretty difficult lot to make it happen. I would say that I agree with Mr. Jones's testimony that this is somewhat different than what we've seen where you have a central drive aisle and this is a small lot. And so it just doesn't, I'm not sure that there's a whole lot that you can do without taking up a significant chunk of the actual property for driveways and drive aisles. So it's my position that Mr. Hatch has done a good job of maximizing the space for the area, which is a higher density use. And so with doing that, Mr. Hatch did address some of the concerns that I had, specifically with the open space and whether or not they'd be willing to take that risk if they couldn't meet it during the next step. It sounds like the side setback is now based on aligning with code. And the one item that I would say that needs to be further defined, potentially either in a motion or if it's determined that it's sufficient in the decision document, is the CC&Rs being explicit to the actual requirements of the common areas, including the use of that guest house as well as the parking, just to make it clear that there is the HOA that's responsible for that, and they're also going to maintain. In the decision document on page 16, item 8, it says a binding contract. Whether or not that actually means CC&Rs, some sort of document that shows that there is some sort of responsibility from an owners association, I think would help from my perspective. I'm in support of this application and would recommend that we recommend approval moving forward.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Montoya. Commissioner Shepherd.
Thank you, Commissioner Rasmussen, our chairman. At first, I did have some concerns about the open space and about the greenbelt access and about the 2-foot setback on the side, but since that's been brought up to code and since Mr. Hatch says that it's the open space is over code with the 13.3%, that those concerns have been addressed for me. And I also agree that the guest parking needs to be clearly delineated to be managed by the HOA. And I guess I'm still not super clear on the tree. It needs to be, the arborist needs to come in and give the decision about whether or not the trees stay on site will be made by an arborist, because I would be okay with approving it if they had to move trees in order to fit all of everything that they needed on that property. So with the side setback at 5 feet and all of the other concerns I just talked about being addressed, I would move forward with approving it as well.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Shepherd. Commissioner Brown.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. First of all, and I agree with what's been said by the two previous commissioners. And I want to recognize, as Commissioner Montoya did, Mr. Jones' comments, because they correspond with mine with regard to Reed Street and the issue. I understand why design review and also the staff had it with regard to Reed, but I'm going to echo Commissioner Montoya with regard to the difficulty of fitting a plan unit development as it's written in the code to a small parcel. And when you do that, you sort of by regulation there's, for example, the thing about not having the garage door dominate the front. That's easily done if you have a large lot and you're talking about a single family home, one home on the lot. But if you're talking about small one like this, where we're trying to get in an area where we're trying to get more density, that's what we want to develop in this whole area. Consistent with the comprehensive plan. You sort of by definition, it's not possible to do it if you don't have the garage door on the front. And when you're putting this number of houses in there, you wind up by definition. That's going to be the large. So then you're back to the question of how can you differentiate that and make it so it doesn't appear to be so dominant. And I think that this developer has done a pretty good job, especially in the most recent submissions that they've done of that particular thing. And so that's been satisfied, and it was an issue that I flagged and also addressed. One issue, I think that the issue with regard to managing that garage, guest garage, or whatever you want to call it, that can be taken care of, and it can be addressed already as the conditions are with requirements for an HOA and CCNRs that are filed. I'm quite familiar with what can be done with those, and I think that can be handled. I think that the issue that was mentioned with regard to the trees can be taken care of with a requirement that they get an arborist or some arborist, and that should be taken care of. If it's not there, I would like the staff to flag it and let us know that it's not there. But my thinking of it, it's already pretty much addressed with what they have to do, that they will have to have that taken care of before it went before the city council. So that leaves us with one thing, and it's a great big one because it's been an issue. And that has to do this issue that's written in our code, that under a PUD, it's up to us to make some kind of a recommendation about whether it meets the requirement for various types of housing. A strict reading of that says, well, it doesn't, but that would have to apply to a whole lot of other PUDs we've been approving, because what is really written and envisioned there is you would have, it, I think, was written for a much larger development where you have a multiplicity of housing possible. You can have single family houses that are standalone. You can have duplexes. You can have a triplex, a fourplex, you can different levels of homes. But when you have a small lot like this, it doesn't fit. And I certainly hope that our staff, in fact, I'm sure they are looking at that as being something that in the future we need to address in our code, so that we're not placing this, because what we really have, that's the only kind of projects we're getting are really infill projects. And the way that's written, it might, as already indicated, it might fit really well in a big development where somebody has put together several acres, all right, or at least an acre, but it doesn't fit well when you have smaller parcels, and we want them to do things like what this developer has done. And I agree with Commissioner Montoya again, that he really has made some changes, partly at our suggestion and request, and partly at the suggestion of design review. So, and he does provide 5 different floor plans, and that's what they are. But in the past, for a small development like this, we have said that that fits the requirement. And I think it does. So I'm supportive, recommending approval.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Brown.
Chairman, before a decision's rendered, I know that you haven't provided your discussion yet, but could I ask for a point of clarification if the late submittals will be included in the record?
Yes,
Thank you.
they will be.
Thank you.
Um, I have not much to add because I'm in full agreement with my fellow commissioners on this one. I think I do see why design review, even though I'm nothing close to a design reviewer. But I do see why they had, I think I understand why they had some questions about this particular application. But as I think what our role is, I think about, as Commissioner Brown said, this part of the city is, this is what we want in this part of the city. I think I saw a third of an acre, just a tad over a third of an acre. And it's a unique shaped lot. So I think there were some constraints as far as what can be done here. And I think what we ended up seeing here tonight and with the application materials is honestly something that ultimately we would want. I do think that it might be worth, as Commissioner Montoya stated, making sure that public parking is clear as a bell in CCNRs. And so whoever makes the motion, however that needs to be worded, I know there is something in the draft conditions, but I just feel like that's still something that needs to be probably said by us for the record, that needs to be clear, because that is sort of a unique arrangement in my mind anyway. Other than that, I'm supportive. So at this point, I suppose we'd say we're ready for a motion.
I'll take a stab at it.
Commissioner Montoya.
All right, so I move that we recommend approval of the the SUB FY 2022-0002 Honchick Townhome subdivision, preliminary plat for the planned unit development located at 3900 North Reed Street with the following conditions. And those conditions will be as staff has indicated on page 16. 5A little I1, that the front setback be changed to 11 feet. And on page 22, number 2, to include the plans for the late submission. And number 3, A, to reflect the waiver A for 11 feet and to delete C. As well as page 16, number 8, to include after a binding contract language that establishes either CCNRs or the HOA to establish the party or parties responsible for the repair and maintenance of the common buildings and guest parking, to include the regulations, and the rest of the sentence would remain.
That's good. Okay, we have a motion and a second. So everyone that's in favor of recommending that city council approve this, please say aye.
Aye.
And aye. All right. Thank you again, everyone that was here tonight to offer testimony. We will go ahead and move on to the next one. So this one, we're going to do 2 applications concurrently here. They're by the same applicant. So the first is CUP FY 2022-14. It's a conditional use permit, and hope I'm pronouncing this name correctly. Michael Maraglio with Bliss Properties is requesting the use of a service provider at 4810 North Adams Street, Ada County, located in the R3 medium density residential zoning district. Attached to that is a zoning amendment, ZON FY 2022-1. Mike Maraglio with Bliss Properties is requesting a rezone of a 0.274 acre property, 4810 North Adams Street, located in R3 residential, R3 medium density residential zoning to C2 general commercial with the stated intent of developing a residential multifamily with a small commercial business. So, Mr. Maraglio, if you're ready, you can come up. You're already up here. Thank you, and state your name and address for the record.
Good evening. My name is Michael Moralio, represent Bliss Properties. Address is 784 South Clearwater Loop, Post Falls, Idaho, 83854.
Thank you.
Good evening, Chairman and Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to present tonight. So with my application, I just want to kind of give a little brief history of the property, kind of the genesis of the application, the efforts to work with the city and the surrounding neighbors on this. I'm going to discuss how the rezone and CUP would, number one, remedy the current situation on the property, two, align with the comprehensive plan and code, and three, allow for future development of a mixed use with permitted uses that are not under the current zone. I'm also going to address areas that concern both the staff report that was published on Monday, as well as set forth in the public testimony. So first off, I would want to just give a little overview, kind of the existing property, the existing conditions. So the property is located at 4810 Adams Street. It's a 200-foot deep by 60-foot street facing property. There's also a easement that runs along the side of that. The front half of the property has a mobile home and a fenced yard, and the back half of the lot has a large garage and kind of open space where my current tenant, who's a landscaper, parks his vehicles and materials, and he operates an off-site landscaping business. So here's a few photos to give you a better idea there. Again, you can see there's two driveways to the property. There's one for the mobile home, and there's one right by the power pole for the back half of the property. This is just zoomed in here on the structures. There's a good picture of the right-of-way easement, and the easement was one of the issues brought up as a staff concern, and I'm actually going to cede a little bit of my time to my lawyer, Justin Cranny, who submitted some documents proving the easement is under my ownership. So here's the garage on the property, and it sits about the middle of the property. And then here's the back half of the property where my current tenant occupies, and he basically just has landscaping vehicles that once a day go out in the morning, and he works off site and then comes back and parks them at night. Here's one more photo of the back half of the property. So just to give you a little idea of what I've learned. So I purchased the property in 2020, but prior to that, it was owned by a longtime Garden City resident, and he maintained it always as a dual use property. He rented the front part, the mobile home, which is fenced and separated from the back half. And he lived on the back half, and he was a service provider. And so my application today is for a rezone with the service provider in order to kind of keep my current tenant being able to operate on the property. The genesis of this whole application, it's a little convoluted. There's a sister, I guess, application going through planning and zoning staff right now for the Elle Estates, and the easement goes through their property. And so the reason why I'm here today, as opposed to not maybe here in 5 years from now with plans to redevelop and rezone then, is there's when I learned of the Elle Estates development plans to build on top of the easement, it kind of accelerated my timeline of communication with planning and zoning. And that was back in February when I attended the meeting, their neighbor meeting. When I brought that to the attention of planning and zoning staff, they were very helpful in facilitating the legal easement to the Elle Estates developer. But again, that wasn't going to stop their development plans. So in order to protect my legal easement, what I had to do was I had to go to the title company and through title insurance, get basically support to help prove the easement is mine, even though I provided it initially to the owner. In doing so, a side effect to that I did not see coming, but my current tenant code enforcement was contacted, reporting that my current tenant was operating a business on site, which was not the case. But what happened from that is that started a collaborative process with me wanting to work with both code compliance at the Garden City level, planning and zoning, my tenant here who's here tonight, and title company in order to figure out, how do I remedy a situation where historically, since 1989, there's been a service provider living on site or working on site, and there's never been an issue. And then all of a sudden, coincidentally, the code enforcement was contacted after I pushed back at the Elle Estates for their development plans to build on top of the easement. So with that little bit of extended intro, it brings me to the rezone and CUP application here today. So my application goals and coming before the chairman and the commission tonight are really just twofold. I just want to be code compliant in Garden City, number one, and that'll allow my tenant, who is a landscaper who works off site, to maintain the use of property. So number two, again, I just want to be code compliant to allow for future development of the property, and I have no timeline for that. And when I do, I'll be back in front of you guys. But my thought around that in the future is that because I'm not a developer, I'm not a big developer, and you have all these townhomes and pretty standard cookie cutter divisions going in. What I envision is maybe a smaller mixed use residential where a solo entrepreneur or a service provider, maybe an accountant, they could have a little office inside there that would allow for mixed use development. So these are some of the permitted uses that are currently allowed in C2, but not allowed in R3. So looking at, kind of the zoning and the comprehensive plan across Garden City, number one, a development would provide, for the rezone, would provide mixed housing and space for a small business. It would be an alignment, and I'm talking to future development, with the Main Street corridor and the comprehensive plan, and also in alignment with the goals of the mixed use residential. So these are some of how a rezone and a CUP would align with comprehensive plan. And this is the rezone part of it, but these areas are kind of highlighted, but it would allow for a mixed use residential along the Main Street corridor. Could create a premier destination to live, work, encourage new and distinctive neighborhoods. The previous public testimony tonight in their presentation gave kind of a unique design, and I think there's maybe more so of that could support Garden City's vitality. It would continue to support commercial uses, support a positive business environment, and continue to support commercial uses. So I might put that twice. So when I was looking for comparables around Garden City and looking into, maybe what Adams Allworth looks like right now, I looked towards a Ada County GIS analysis of the city that looked at the zoning. And so that the red line down the middle is Adams Allworth there, as you can see. And this is as of June 2022, 48.6% of Adams Allworth is currently zoned C2. And so my parcel there is highlighted 4810 North Adams right there. And if it were to be rezoned to C2, it really is pretty insignificant. It had 0.5% to the total across Adams Allworth there. So again, the R3 is in yellow, C2 is in green. So kind of just looking at the future development part of the rezoning, then I'm gonna jump into the CUP a little bit more. But the whole goal again is if I'm able to get a rezone to general commercial, I can offer more to residents than just housing. I envision a small business to support residents on the property, as well as the growing density within Garden City. And something that's just kind of a walk up or something I envision. This is an example of something that might, develop in the future, but just something that's like a walk up that's very low impact to the area. This is one example. Could be a future bicycle service shop, which is currently a permitted use in C2, but is not allowed in R3, and supported by the comprehensive plan, as this property is in a great location. It's only a block away from the green belt. And so I thought this might be a good little use right there on that part of and 48th and Adams Street. So then just looking at, again, in congruence with the comprehensive plan, I'm thinking that, big developers, they might have their strategies in the future of developing, cheaply townhomes or whatever they might want to do. But my wife and I, when we bought the property, we saw another potential, another pathway of maybe doing something a little different. So now the CUP for the service provider. Again, my whole goal, and I put this slide twice, but I just want to be code compliant with the existing conditions and allow my tenant to maintain use of the property. So looking at the comprehensive plan, service providers right now in Garden City and in the future are going to be very much in demand to help support development and building of the community. Allowing my landscaper to remain on the property not only benefits my property, benefits the proposed development adjacent to my property, but it benefits Garden City at large. The parcels that I own has historically been used for dual use and service provider as far back as 1989. And so prohibiting the service provider now kind of would run contrary to both the history of use of parcel and alignment with the comprehensive plan. And these are just similar statements again of how the CUP for a service provider, in my estimation, supports the comprehensive plan. So it supports it by providing, again, if their service provider is allowed to be on the property in a mixed use development, a destination place to live and work. I'll just read a couple of these. Markets the city to smaller businesses and supports a positive environment to environmental businesses. The other thing that came up when looking into the CUP for a service provider is Garden City is so uniquely advantaged in the fact that there are so many hardworking people in the community, and there's a lot of people with work vehicles and everything on their properties. And so when it was brought to my attention from code compliance that I was not in code compliance, it was number one, a lesson for me I didn't know. And number two, it really speaks to, in my mind, that maybe other people aren't in code compliance, and of course that's not my issue, but I would hate for something to make a precedent that would impact other people at large in kind of hardworking community the Garden City is. Now I want to go into addressing some of the agency reports. So ACHD report came out in support of the application. Department of Environmental Quality had no issues with my application. Again, a lot of these are because I'm not proposing any type of development at this time. The planning and zoning staff report concerns I want to address, and these were the three I pulled out, and Hannah can let me know if there's something else I'm missing here, but the first one I wanted to start out, I want to cede a little bit of time to Justin Cranny, my lawyer, to speak about the easement.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is Justin Cranny, Holly Troxel, 877 Main Street, Boise, Idaho. We've been retained to help Bliss Properties in this application and to defend its easement that has been challenged. As an initial matter, I did submit documents to planning and zoning to substantiate the validity of this easement. When I submitted it the other day, I realized I missed some deeds, so I'm going to resubmit the entire package. You'll make sure that's added to the record. That includes all of the deeds that are referenced in the attached letter. There were two that were missing. My apologies for that omission. In essence, in 1977, there was a deed that was granted that abutted the properties. It traversed the neighboring property, bisected it. Subsequently, about 20 years later, that easement was vacated and shifted to its current location. Since that time, there have been no documents that have vacated or otherwise affected that easement. And as far as we can tell, based on the record and the documents that have been recorded, that easement is still valid and enforceable. And there's realistically a challenge to it unless they can provide some written document is baseless and unsubstantiated. So with that, it is our position that easement is 100% certain. And I stand for any questions. If you have any, I can stand now or wait until your applicant is done.
Yeah, let's do that.
So
Thank you very much.
Okay, and then including in the staff report, I also want to address the service provider provisions that staff pointed out that I might be tough to comply based on the configuration of my property. I also want to discuss the spot zoning that was brought up, that even though staff indicated that that's not the most important criteria in regard to a rezone, it's mostly based on a comprehensive plan. But I also have some things I want to present regarding examples of that. So first off, looking at this code snippet right here that staff brought up on the site layout. My property again has that drive lane that is adjacent on the edge of the property, the deeded legal easement. And so in order to address this, the intent of this, I think there might be other ways to achieve it. Other than maybe kind of the standard landscape provisions that don't really work for my property based on its shape and configuration. Driving through Garden City this morning, also looking around at other properties, there's other drive lanes on other properties. R3 and C2 properties obviously converge a lot of parts of Garden City. And so these were just some examples when I'm driving around looking at, which I'm pretty sure are all C2 and R3 properties coming together. So what this points to in my estimation is that, based on kind of the precedence of these, I think, some sort of separation could be achieved with a similar barrier, a fence or retaining wall that would meet the intent of that code requirement there, and not devalue the property. And then this is just some examples around Garden City here. Again, when I was digging into the GIS analysis of some of the spot zoning that's already occurred. And again, this is, I think, lesser of a concern to staff based on my understanding of the comprehensive plan is the overarching factor when it comes to a rezone problem. This is just kind of highlighting, again, kind of zoomed in, but if my property were to be rezoned, which would allow a CUP with a service provider, I'm pretty close to kind of junkyard jalopy there on the right. you can see the green area there, C2. That's about 260 feet away. And then the other commercial 2 area, 244 feet away. And again, Adams is about 50-50 when it comes to commercial 2 versus R3 zoning. And then, as you guys saw, there was also some public testimony that came through from the adjacent owner.
And I don't want to interrupt you, but you're a bit over time right now. So I just, if you could, maybe in the next minute or two.
Yes. So the adjacent property owner put some public testimony online, and a lot of it that I'm not going to get into is not relevant or wasn't true. It's more, I think, frustration due to their fact their development needs to change. But some of the things are important to Garden City and should be addressed, and I want to talk about it a little bit. Is, he brought up noise. Again, my tenant drives up once, gets the work rigs, and drives off the property each day. So it's not a big issue, and noise actually would affect my other tenant the most, because he only has one tenant left on the property and they're far away. Additionally, he wants to build a 14 townhome development where historically there's been 3 dwellings. So there's going to be a lot greater impact on traffic and noise from that than anything that could, that my tenant would provide or anything like that. And then finally, again, the easement's been submitted as legal proof for the Garden City. So just in closing here, I want to thank everybody. I think history of why this application is relevant, why it came to be. I will continue as I have to work with P&Z staff and address any concerns and work with my neighbors to benefit all parties. The rezone with the CUP, I believe, is in congruence with comprehensive plan, city code, and benefits both the future and present day of Garden City. And finally, again, just when you're thinking about your ruling a little bit, again, this impacts people at this ruling tonight. So it impacts them in 3 different ways. It provides, if you support this application, it provides a small landscaping company the opportunity to maintain use of the property and continue to operate an off-site business. It maintains Garden City's support for service providers who work within and to support residents of the city, as it doesn't draw on any precedents picking on one versus others in the community. And it maintains support for property owners who are not large developers by helping them maintain their property rights and supporting their tenants and help create a vibrant and diverse Garden City. Thank you.
Thank you. If you'll, remain up there, we'll see if any of the commissioners have any questions for you. So that said, are there any questions for the applicant or the applicant's attorney?
Chairman.
Mr. Montoya.
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
So thank you. I appreciate the testimony. I had a couple questions specifically about the tenant. So how long has the current tenant lived there?
So I have 2 tenants on the property. One tenant has been there for, I think, about a year up front. But he's part of a lease that's gone on since I've owned the property since 2020. He was added to the lease. And the other tenant, my landscaper, that's in the back of the property. I think he's been there for about a year or 2, maybe, but I'd have to check on that.
Okay.
And before him, I had another tenant, was a service provider as well. So.
Right. And then I believe that I caught what you were saying, that does he operate his business from that location or does he live there?
So my tenant that's a service provider does not live there. My tenant I have a tenant in the mobile home that does live on site. So two different tenants is the property kind of separated.
Okay, and the tenant that does the landscaping just parks his cars there, or is he running his business out of that location?
So he parks his vehicles there and he parks some of the landscaping materials there, but he takes everything, he's only, I think, got 2 workers for him. They park their personal vehicles there in the morning, grab their landscape rigs and anything they need, and then they leave for the entire day. They're gone all day, and then they come back at night, switch out rigs. So really, I think they're only on the property maybe 5% of a day max.
And they're using a building from that location, or is it just a yard?
There's a yard and then there's a garage that's located on site.
Okay, so they're using the garage and the yard,
Yes,
and then they're not affiliated with the tenant who resides there.
correct.
And so if they didn't operate or store their trucks or do anything in that nature, you would not be out of conformance for use based on the current tenant who resides there, correct?
Can you
So-
please repeat that again?
So you have a tenant that resides there. If there was no business operating in the other part of it, you would be in conformance with the current zoning.
Yes, if the landscaper, that he operates his business off site, but yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Montoya. Any other questions for the applicant? Commissioner Brown?
Commissioner Montoya asked the first question I was going to ask. So what we're saying is, in your wording, sir, your current service providing tenant uses the property, is that correct?
Yes.
Where does he operate his business from?
So I guess he could operate it from the property, but I guess what I meant by that, to clarify, is that he doesn't bring anybody on site. He's a landscaper, so off-site is where he works, but I guess he operates it from, I guess it could be the truck. Or home if he's doing computer work, I assume, because he doesn't have an office, there's no office setup or anything like that.
And you don't know exactly how long he's been there?
I could look it up, but I think the lease, I'd have to look. It's been a year. I think I remember. I think it'll be a year in November. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown. Commissioner Shepherd, any questions?
Not at the moment.
Okay,
Chairman, I do have a follow-up.
sure,
if I may.
Commissioner Montoya.
So what was the use prior to your landscape?
The use of the previous service provider?
Yep.
He installed gutters. And so all he did was he stored them in the garage. And he would basically pick them up and go around town and install gutters.
And how long was he there for?
I want to say about a year as well, but I'd have to double check that, but around that time frame.
And then, so did you lease that space when it became vacant?
That's what I did, exactly. I rented it again and not knowing, and this is where I've been forthfront with Garden City Compliance Department and plans on the whole time, not knowing that it was an issue, and then I learned it was an issue based on the call, that it wasn't, couldn't do that. Basically.
And then that was after you had already leased the premises?
Yes, and then code compliance was they've been working with us the whole time to basically, come to this point. So it's been an effort of April when it was reported all the way to this point, because this was talking with planning and zoning staff and code compliance. This was really our only route in order to keep our current renter tenant on the property as long as he wanted to be there. If I didn't go this route, then he would not be there anymore.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, commissioners, and thank you, sir. You'll have a chance to come back up a little bit later. We'll hear from the staff now.
Okay, thank you for your patience. Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, I would just like to start with noting that the documents that Mr. Craney refers to were added to the record yesterday, September 20th, since that is when they were submitted, but of course it would not include those two deeds that he mentioned and has now submitted to you in his folder tonight. Also, there was an ACHD late review submitted to the city yesterday, September 20th, that has been added to the record, or at least online for you to view, in which you would need to add to the record because they are considered late materials. And with that, the property associated with conditional use permit 2022-0014 and rezone fiscal year 2022-0001 is located at 4810 North Adams Street. It is currently zoned R3 medium density residential and found within the mixed use residential in the Main Street corridor of the comprehensive plan's future land use designations. Code enforcement became aware of the ongoing service provider use operating out of the rear of this property in late spring of 2022. Staff has had ongoing conversations with the applicant regarding the service provider use on site, and that it is not currently a permitted use within the R3 zoning district. As part of these conversations, the option to rezone was discussed. The applicant expressed desire to rezone his property from R3 to C2. Because R3, as I have stated, does not allow for service providers, and the general commercial zoning district of C2 does allow for service providers as long as the applicant goes through a conditional use permit process. So the application in front of you tonight is that of a request to rezone the property from R3 to C2 and a conditional use permit to allow for the use of the existing service provider on site to remain. Without the approval of the rezone application, the existing service provider use is not permitted on site and must cease operations immediately. The associated conditional use permit has been analyzed, and it appears that the CUP is not code compliant due to the standards set forth in Garden City Code 82C36. In which it is stated that no structure, facility, drive lane, parking area, or loading area shall be located adjacent to a residential district. As the surrounding adjacent properties are residentially zoned, which is also, they're also zoned R3, the use for the site as a service provider would not be permitted. The property is within the mixed-use residential and Main Street corridor designations of the comprehensive plan. The Main Street corridor aims to create a Main Street as a principal street with a mix of concentrated uses along Adams and Allworth. The focus of the development along this corridor should be for minimum front yard setbacks, parking on the street and behind buildings, as well as pedestrian-based amenities. For the mixed-use residential future land use designation, it allows for residential and commercial uses in form and scale that is residential in character and design. A mix of residential, such as small offices and retail, and semi-public uses are appropriate for this district. The staff analysis details each use the city currently identifies in both the R3 and the C2 zoning districts. Some uses such as industry flex, commercial entertainment facilities, RV parks, vehicle sales, and warehouses would be conditionally permitted uses where in the R3 district, whereas they would not be permitted. They would not be permitted in the R3 zoning district, whereas they would be conditionally permitted in the C2. The uses that I just mentioned would not be in alignment with the comprehensive plan, as they are more intense in use and nature. Please do note that without a development agreement in place, any and all uses that are permitted or conditionally permitted within the C2 zoning district could essentially move into the property so long as that applicant or that person pursuing that use goes through the correct permitting processes. So without that development agreement, any of the permitted uses within C2 could potentially move into that property. The applicant is not proposing a development agreement as of this point in time. The property is currently surrounded by R3 properties. You'll see on the left-hand side of my screen, it is the yellow, which is indicated as R3. The property seems to be in the middle of that. If the property were rezoned to C2, it would constitute as spot zoning. And spot zoning refers to a change in zoning of a particular parcel or parcels that is out of character with the surrounding area and the comprehensive plan, and is done for the benefit of the particular landowner rather than for the benefit of the community as a whole. Idaho, like most states, recognizes that spot zoning is illegal and that such zoning may be set aside. The most widely accepted tests for determining illegal spot zoning, sometimes stated in combination, sometimes separately, are whether the zoning of the parcel in question is in accordance with the comprehensive plan. Whether the zoning is subject to whether the zoning of the subject parcel is compatible with the uses in the surrounding area, and whether the zoning of the subject property serves the public welfare or merely confers to discriminatory benefit of the owner of that property. The stated purpose of the C2 zoning district conforms with what the comprehensive plan wishes in the neighborhood to develop has. The purpose of the Main Street corridor is to accommodate and encourage expansion and renewal of the commercial and residential uses that are compatible with each other. A variety of residential, office, and commercial uses are encouraged to provide a mix of activities necessary to establish a truly urban character. And the primary goal of the C2 zoning district is to allow for the activities which are more compatible with mixed uses or residential uses and minimally disruptive to the neighborhood. However, staff does have concerns with the flexibility and incompatibility of the C2 zoning district with the adjacent R3 zoning properties. Staff also has concerns with its relation, the C2 zoning district's relation to the comprehensive plan's designation goals. Regardless of the purpose statement, the C2 zoning district contemplates uses that are not compatible with the residential uses surrounding this property. And specifically with the more industrial uses, as I previously mentioned. The conditional use permit application does mention that the long-term plans for the property would be to redevelop as a mixed-use multifamily development. Multifamily developments are a permitted use within the R3 zoning district. And the district does allow for many commercial uses as well. The R3 zoning district just would not allow for as many commercial uses as the C2 zoning district. If the applicant wishes to develop a multifamily project, the rezone would not be necessary. The only reason to rezone the property would be to allow for the service provider use that currently exists on the site and to allow for more commercial uses than what the current R3 zoning allows. And with that, I stand for questions.
Thank you, Hannah. Any questions for Hannah and staff?
I have a question.
Commissioner Brown?
Mr. Chairman, Hannah. I understand, and as you cited already, the problems. Obviously, these two, whatever we do with regard to them, they got to be consistent, I would think, between the zoning application and the CU application. One with the other doesn't work. And I understand, and I'm going to remind you, and you're going to confirm what you said, and you put it on page 6 of the staff result. If, and we're a recommending body for the rezone, If the rezoning doesn't take place, then the current tenant, that operation of a landscaping company there, the service provider, it would not be, it's not legal for it to continue in that. Is that correct?
Correct.
If it was approved and we are the deciding people for the CU, then that particular operation would not be consistent with the new zoning. Is that correct?
Can you repeat the?
Well, let me see. I'll say what the way you say in your report. If zoning, it's a rezone, FY 2022 number 1 is approved, the use of a service provider is not permitted per Garden City Code 8-2C-36.
Correct.
So that is correct. What type of zoning that we have in the code, not spot zoning, would permit operation of a service provider that was providing landscaping services?
So I can answer the first part of your question, Commissioner Brown. Essentially, because all of the surrounding properties around this property are zoned R3, any rezone that occurs would essentially be spot zoning. The way we can combat spot zoning, though, is if that zone is more in alignment with the comprehensive plan. And so it would take looking at our other uses such as C1 or M for mixed use, any of the other residentially zoned districts we could rezone to. So for a service provider, I'm looking at Garden City Code 8-2B. The use would be permitted in, if I can read it. Let me just pull it. See. So thank you, Jenna. It would be permitted in C1 and LI.
That's the only question. Thank you.
Commissioner Shepherd?
Thank you, Chairman. Well, following up on Commissioner Brown's question, I got a little thrown off when you said that the service provider is allowed in C1 and LI. Did I understand that right?
Correct, yeah.
But he's applying for C2, C3. I'm sorry, I have to get my numbers right, but it's not it's not either of the ones you just said. Is that right?
Correct. So, and I'll pull up code too, so we can all reference it. So we have this service provider. It's permitted in C1, conditional use permit, which is what we're doing today, C2, and then LI is permitted.
Okay, so you're talking about being permitted and we're talking about it.
Yes, so these blank spaces, they represent that the use is prohibited in those zoning districts.
Okay, that's right where I got thrown off. Thank you. I had a question on what constitutes a storage yard. Because when I looked at the pictures, it looked like there was a lot stored on there. And if it's just like a place where people are parking cars and coming and going and storing vehicles, I wasn't sure if that.
Yeah.
If I was looking too deep into the word storage yard.
So And this was a conversation that code enforcement had with the applicant as well as myself. And we were trying to determine whether or not the function of the site was more of that of the storage facility or yard or the service provider use. And because the tenant and the owner of the landscape company comes to the site with employees and drops their personal cars off and actually gets into a fleet of vehicles to then service yards off-site. That fell more in alignment with what the use of the service provider is versus the use of what a storage yard would be.
And then if I understood correctly, if we did condition this, then we would want to include a development agreement for it to only be used as this particular service provider function, so that all these other different types of businesses couldn't move in.
Well, so Commissioner Shepherd, the staff did not draft the requirement of a development agreement. Development agreement is recorded with the rezone ordinance, and it would have to go through a pretty strenuous legal review and counseling process. As the applicant hasn't presented any kind of drafting of that, in the discussion of a development agreement hasn't really seriously been discussed until just recently. It would be a difficult condition to require. The commissions could require the development agreement in the conditions. We would just need to hash over what that development agreement would need to say. For example, I've seen development agreements where it prohibited particular uses of that zoning district, really just limiting it to 3 uses. So maybe in this instance, it could prohibit the more industrial uses. Whereas if, like in your instance, if you limited the development agreement to only service provider, you're hindering the property in such a way that even the development agreement is going against that 82C36 code, where service providers aren't even permitted adjacent to the R3 zoning district.
Thank you, Commissioner Shepherd. So yeah, I have a question too. And it's more like a scenario. So I have obviously no idea how my partners up here are going to feel about either of these applications, but if we get to a point of a motion and we recommend to city council that we recommend denial of the rezone, then we don't have any action on the CUP, or yeah, I guess just how do we play both of these? Because we're recommending for the rezone, but we could approve the CUP because we approve or deny CUPs. We're a deciding body for those. So I'm just trying to figure out how that timing works, since one's recommending and one's for us to weigh in on.
Let me grab. I believe I drafted in the conditional use permit decision document that the use of the site for a service provider may not commence until the associated rezone has been approved by city council and the ordinance has been approved. So you could approve the conditional use permit here tonight. And
Contingent, I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
just so my head's working here. Contingent upon city council approving the rezone.
correct.
Okay. So we do need to have both conversations then tonight versus waiting for whatever city council decides to do.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Chairman, there's also the alternative that I don't necessarily recommend, but you could always move the conditional use permit to the next hearing while you recommend approval or denial of the rezone.
Okay.
And then based off of that discussion, make a determination on the cup. But
Okay. All right. Thank you. Just had to make sure my brain was working correctly because when we started the meeting, it wasn't working correctly. I forgot the commissioner's name. So thank you.
yes.
All right. We are at the point of hearing public testimony here, and I do have a list of people here. So Mr. Cranny, you've already been up, so you're good, or you want to, you're good. Okay. Cindy Pettit. I thought she said she wanted to give testimony on this one. Oh, okay, okay. All right. And then David Jones. All right, sir, you can come up. Name and address, please.
Yes, my name is David Jones. My address is 4810 Adams. I'm the front tenant of that lot. I support this application. I have had no problems from Anthony, and like was said, his couple guys come in, get in their trucks, and they leave right around 8 o'clock every morning. Then about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, they come back and they leave. Never had any problems. There's no noise in the day. There's been a couple weeks where I've been off work where I've seen no activity throughout the day except for come and go.
Okay.
I think I'm done. Thank you. And I'm hungry and tired.
You did great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so the applicant can come up and provide any rebuttal testimony he may want to provide.
Chairman, I
Yes.
believe that Mr. Job may have been
Whoops.
signed up on another form.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Yeah, my name is Anthony Job. Do I give my address?
Yeah, please.
2748 West Good Court, Boise, Idaho. I rent from Mike here, and I'm just here to support him in all his efforts to help me have a place to park my equipment. And I appreciate all his work because a lot of people just say, hey, see ya later. But if I move out, who's going to move in? It helps his income. He counts on money. I think that I improved that area. I mean, there's burnt cars. I mean, all around there, it's pretty cluttery and dirty and, you know, not very attractive. And I think the area that I maintain looks a lot better than the adjacent property. I mean, there's a burn up trailer in the property that's with tires on it from the property that the complaint originated from. And I think it's just a little dispute between the two is what started this whole thing. And that's why there's been so many businesses or people working out of there without an issue, because no one really was worried about it until the neighbor tenant or the neighbor property owner and Mike had an issue. And so now they're just trying to create a hassle and a stink and, you know, and we're there 8 o'clock in the morning. We're actually back about 7:30. We only work 8 hours a day. We come, we park. I have a house in the north end. I have a 2-car garage. He has a big garage space that I rent so I can put more of my things in there because we can't afford to go buy a new house with a 4-car garage. So the garage that I rent from him helps me store my personal items. Plus I have 3 work trucks that we park there. Most of our equipment's left on the jobs. We don't do mowing or anything. We do installation. So all of our heavy equipment stays on our jobs. And then we move it from one job to the other job to the other job. So there's really 3 trucks there and a trailer. I mean, but I have a lot more equipment that's not there. It's overall, it's not my forever home. You know, I was buying a property, or I had an agreement to buy a property on 43rd Street across from the school there. And then a developer came in and bought it out from underneath me. And so now Mike had a place, I moved on there, and now here we are. So I'm just here to support him and try to stay where I'm at for a little bit, you know, because I don't feel like moving again, but it's up to you guys. So,
Okay, thank
There
you
you
very
go.
much. Thank you, sir. And I apologize, I overlooked you there. Looks like we have a hand raised on Zoom too. All
That's me
right.
again.
All right, if you can do your name again, please, and
Yep.
go right ahead.
Jason Jones, 208 East 33rd Street, Garden City, Idaho. I guess since I was here, I thought I really didn't, I feel like I'm kind of neutral. Obviously, I'm a big fan of property rights, but this probably is illegal. And so I think probably, you know, like I said, I think I'm kind of neutral on it, but I did have some questions. I think one of the big questions when I had looked at this application material was, where is the easement material recorded? I didn't see it in the documentation, so I think that was part of the conflict, was that all these trucks are actually being driven on the neighboring property with what appears to be an easement, but I didn't actually see that easement anywhere in the document. So I don't know if it's there and I missed it, and maybe that can be answered real quick. But I guess in my mind, that's maybe part of the conflict, is that to get to access the back of the property, these trucks are being driven on the neighboring property, which is who wrote in the letters of opposition. So, you know, I think it would be interesting to understand whether they actually have a right to do that before approving even the conditional use. So those are my comments, and maybe that can be clarified.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, now you can come up and provide any rebuttal that you like.
Chairman, Commissioners, thank you again. First point of clarification I want to make is that the reason why C2 was chosen over light industrial and the other option is because in consultation with staff and just making sense as I kind of studied the problem at hand, C2 fits the area, you know, in kind of the best way there. And so it was, you know, would not want to have anything industrial, anything on Adams Street in that section. Even there is a light industrial a little bit further to the west there. Second point of clarification, and just to talk about again, is that one of the main code requirements against the service provider, again, is, I think, could be mitigated. I spoke with a longtime architect in Garden City, just discussing a little bit about my situation and what happens sometimes when you have properties that you can't quite put buffers between the commercial and residential. And that's where the idea came of, you know, trying to meet that intent of that requirement in another way. And I'm willing to work with staff on that, how to do that. The easement itself, it's not a throughway easement of a property. My lawyer and we submitted to staff, you know, proof of, you know, the legal part of the easement. I'm not talking to that as so much as maybe the comment the person just made on Zoom. Was historically 3 properties on the adjacent parcel. They all had their own driveways. None of them used the easement. The easement's been just used for the property that was, and it's deeded together with the easement there as it runs parallel up the long, you know, kind of a longer, narrower property. So there's never really any issues of crossover. And then finally, you know, like it was brought up, the idea of a development agreement. And, you know, as I have since April, since this thing came to fruition, you know, worked with staff and code compliance. And I mean, I'm open to keep working with the city of Garden City, and if that's something that might allow, you know, kind of a common sense scenario in order for me to be code compliant with my service provider, and limit any future, I don't know, worst case scenarios in regards to a C2 development. Because I have no plans to sell the property. But if that's something that might facilitate or put at ease the city's concerns, I'd be open to that. So with that, want to thank everybody, and that'll conclude my.
Any further questions for the applicant by the commission? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so close the public hearing at this point and move to a discussion amongst the commission members, starting over to the right this time, Commissioner Shepherd.
Thank you, Chairman. I noticed in the it's the draft decision, if we were to condition the zone change, or if we're recommending the zone change, but if we were to approve the conditions, if the contingent upon the zone change, there seemed to be like a lot of like property improvements that were also required to come up to code, like a fence and landscaping and those kinds of things. Are we gonna have any discussion on that tonight, or is that just all contingent? Like those are, if we do this, they're gonna have to do everything. That's on here.
Well, they're in the draft conditions. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I can't remember off the top of my head if all those things are.
Mr. Chairman, the drafted decision document does have all of the yellow highlighted portions of the staff report in there as conditions for approval. So the property would need to meet code compliance of all those sections. It is standard for a conditional use permit to have to update their site based off of those conditions.
Yep.
And if I'm understanding correctly, if it's denied, then the tenant has to move his business off immediately, or is there any time to?
That was a question I had too, that I meant to ask and I didn't.
I'm asking questions more in the discussion, but.
So if I could ask that and reiterate her question, Commissioner Shepherd's question. Do we have the capacity to make it not immediate?
Can I just follow up on that?
Sure.
So would it be possible, moving towards that route, if that was the case, if we deny the rezone and the CUP, but recommend to city council that a temporary use be assigned, so then that way they would have a maximum of up to 30 days to essentially vacate? So you'd say, we're not approving it, we're approving it as a temporary use. And then you have the 30 days to fall within that temporary use category.
Chairman, Commissioner Montoya, I don't know that it would be technically legal to give a temporary use that does not have the ability to have a conditional use. But certainly, should you be starting to go that route, perhaps the decision could have a condition that the decision ultimately on the conditional use and the vacation thereof be contingent upon what city council does with the rezone. So perhaps that you do note something along the lines of that I don't know how to articulate this, in that I think that I can understand the desire to give more time, but I'm unaware of anything in code that would permit the additional time. However, they will have an active application through at least the city council. hearing. However, as has been pointed out tonight, the conditional use is a final decision with this body. So I did not help answer that, other than I do not know of a tool to allow for the additional time aside from an active application.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank
for
you.
Clarifying that.
One more.
Sure.
So one other way to potentially handle that would be to move any decision on the conditional permit or the CUP to after the city council. So that would, if there was a decision by city council to deny the zoning, then they could still have the time before the expiration of the permit for the next meeting to potentially at least vacate the site or something without it being immediate, correct? Would that basically toll the decision on the CUP, or if
Chairman Commissioner Montoya, it would result in that there's an active application with the intent to remedy the non-compliance. And I certainly, precedent has been where, again, I don't know of anything that tolls per se in code the non-compliance thereof until after a certificate of compliance or a certificate of occupancy is granted. But I think that it would be noteworthy in a record that there would be an active application.
Commissioner Shepherd, do you want to continue your discussion comments?
Thank you, Chairman. With respect to this position, I would like to defer to the more experienced commissioners. Because I like also respectful of the property rights, but also I see like the picture too from the city side, and it's hard for me right now to say that I would straight out deny it, because I don't want to have any negative influence on someone's livelihood, but I also feel that I guess without more information from the city council, they're the ones that are going to ultimately make this decision on the rezone, and everything is contingent upon that. So I just don't know that I can recommend anything right now.
Okay.
Based on inexperience.
Okay.
That's okay.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is really tough because generally I'm very supportive of the idea of people having businesses in Garden City, helps us all. And some of us need landscape guys to come and fix up our landscaping. That being said, both of these have to be acted together, and the one that starts it has got to be the rezone. I think Hannah has made my reading of rules and regulations about zoning, and her statement she made that I already quoted on page 6 is pretty accurate. And that being, and that's why it's a difficult thing. If the rezone is not approved, and like we've already pointed out, we're recommending bodies, but if the city council decides that they're not going to approve the rezone, then this service provider is not permitted because it's not authorized in the zone. And I believe, with regard to that part of the action, that this is a spot zoning that would be done. And I think that Hannah is correct. And she and Jenna have pointed out this would be a spot rezoning. And I don't believe that it can be justified in the comprehensive plan and what our plans are for that part of Garden City, that particular type of so it would be a spot zoning that would be illegal. So with regard to that, my recommendation will be to recommend to the city council that they not approve a rezone. So that leaves us with the CUP. And the second part of her statement on the same page was the following. If the rezone is approved, the use of a service provider is not permitted in that zone by the city code. So then the question comes about, then if that's the case, then recommending it, whether you put it off or anything like that, does not make sense for us to make a decision to approve the CUP, at least for me, if I'm going to say, I'm going to recommend you don't rezone it. And then the question comes up, in which I understand that the applicant said he would be willing to go along with some kind of a development agreement, that he already described what he envisions in the future at some unknown date he would want to put there, and it would also be consistent with the new rezone. If they did that, if you rezone it as C2, this particular operation that is being operated from that, he's not just storing stuff there and that, he's operating the business from that location. And it wouldn't be allowed in that, and certainly C1 and LI don't apply to that particular area. And besides, if you put them in a place right now, that just be a more egress violation of being a spot zone. It'd be a worse spot zone. It really wouldn't fit in that particular area. And so that leaves me in the situation when you think about it. So my position is that they're both connected, and we're considering them together. That's because of that. So in my opinion, for me, I will be voting no to recommending a rezone, and I will vote no to the CUP for the reasons I just outlined.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Brown. Commissioner Montoya.
Thank you, Chairman. So I got to give it to the applicant coming here to go to bat for your tenant. I think that's huge. And I truly empathize with you being in this position where you have someone that's on that site and you're trying to do the right thing and help their business. But I would echo with what Commissioner Brown is saying. I can't see the connection between the service provider, a C2, and then a hypothetical situation of some future development. And so the way that I'm holding it is, it seems a bit opportunistic in the sense of going to C2 because you have a C2 provider, and then potentially if someone else comes for an LI, then it's an LI or a C1. So if you were coming today with a proposal for a development that was within the C2, I think my position would be different. But just for the simple fact of allowing your tenant to stay on site, I can't get there. So I do appreciate you coming, and I do have to agree with what Commissioner Brown has said, and I'll be voting the same way.
Thank you, Commissioner Montoya. Yeah, to echo, I guess maybe in a slightly different way, my fellow commissioners' points. This one is difficult because, as Commissioner Brown and Montoya both said in different ways, that we like when we have businesses of all shapes and sizes operating in our city. But all that said, I look at everything. I try to consider everything that I've seen tonight and heard tonight. And I can't get to a point where I can get this to make sense from the standpoint of overall zoning for a city and what that means with respect to one lot that needs to change. So I guess I'm just saying spot zoning. But I struggle to get to that spot just because of what it means. But that's the spot I'm at. So I agree with Commissioners Brown and Montoya. So I think that means we're ready for a motion.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Brown.
I would take a stab at this. And I'm going to do it in the specific order because I think it's the order which they should be considered. And that's not in the order that they are on the agenda. So I move that we recommend disapproval of the rezone zone FY 2022 #1, requesting a rezone of the property that we've been talking about. Along with all of the what's the terminology that we're supposed to put in these findings of facts, conditions of approval, and conclusions of law. Is that correct?
You got it.
With regard to that, as written in the draft approval, the draft document for disapproval. And along with it, I recommend disapproval of CUP FY 2022 #14, the conditional use permit for the said property, which it should be in motion. That will follow along with my recommended with regard to the rezone. It's consistent. And also in that case, with regard to those findings of facts, conditions of approval, and conclusions of law.
So we have a motion.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, motion and second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Let's take a short 5-minute break. And then we'll get to the last one. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here this evening.
Okay, and thank you for giving us a break.
Yeah, I talked with. No, I talked with Jenna.
I was kind of preparing for this, so I do have an option that I just over 30 days, 2 weeks. And even if you don't have to put anything on paper. But but I will, and I do have a place.
Gotta bring your own water or something. I think we ought to have that tested. Well, she brings her own home, wasn't it? You can't, but we don't know what she drinking. We might prefer what she brings in her bottle than what they provide us in this one. Right?
Cinnamon tea, so
But
it's cinnamon tea.
cinnamon tea. There you go. So you're a tea lover, huh?
Yeah. I like it, it's comforting.
I forget my own name sometimes.
It wasn't clear. I saw his face and be like, oh. But he's not here. My brain just dried. Oh, well.
It's all good.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Are those your beads?
Thank you.
Shoot, I didn't say that. Something else I needed to say probably to add to the record.
So, the ACHD.
Yeah, that's the
So those are the
These are
easement
the
docs that he handed him. Yeah.
They'll be on for the record for city council.
When city council gonna hear?
The 10th.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's see, so. Start.
We can just start.
Okay.
Get
Okay. Oops. Okay, we are back in session here. Next item up is a subdivision FY 2022-5. Nicolette Womack is requesting a new construction of a townhome subdivision development. Coffee Townhomes located at 8373 West Chinden Boulevard in the C2 General Commercial Zoning District. This one, we are also a recommending body for this one to City Council. So Nicolette. All right, yeah, you're up, and just a name and address, please, for the record, and then you have 15 minutes.
Yeah, I believe I should share screen, correct? Nicolette Womack, with Kimley Horn, address is 1100 West Idaho Street, Suite 210, Boise, Idaho 83702. Commissioners, thanks for having us tonight. We know it's getting late, so we'll keep this short and to the point for you. So we are with Coffee Townhomes project. The applicant team includes Mark Russell from SRG Holdings, also known as Romley Development, who's local to this area. Andy shown here is with DR Horton. He's the builder on the project. I'm a planner with Kimley Horn, and Abby and Kelly are engineers with Kimley Horn. The builder on this project is DR Horton. An introduction to them in this area. They are moving into the Treasure Valley market. Generally, they are known as a builder of more affordable market rate development. So they are bringing that market rate on the more affordable end of the spectrum. So before you tonight, that planned unit development for reductions in interior setbacks and the other modifications that staff will mention. Subdivision permit is also included, and that will plot the lots for individual sales. So these are for ownership. Timeline of how we got here tonight. So in March of this year, we had a design review pre-application session where we got initial feedback. In June of this year, we had our pre-application meeting, which turned into our neighborhood meeting, and then a submittal in July, and that brings us to tonight. The project is west of the Chinden and Glenwood intersection. It's important to note that the site is located at the Chinden Boulevard street level. However, the area, also known as the bench to its rear, is a 50-foot grade change between the two. And then the Thurman Drain Canal runs along the property line, which kind of jogs in some exciting ways. And then to the east of our site is the U-Haul rental facility. The project, the site is the future land use designation of mixed use residential. This calls for about a 40% lot coverage and pocket park features. And then it's also within the Green Boulevard overlay. So you'll see significant improvements to the Chinden Boulevard. It's also currently zone Z2, so no zone changes. And then the project is 7 acres in size. We're proposing 76 single family units, all 3-bedroom. And there's a overall density of 10.59 dwelling units per acre. And then we are proposing approximately a 40% building lot coverage. And that is removing the canal easement area, which is unbuildable, and the portion on the western corner, which with setbacks is also unbuildable. The project is meeting the parking requirements per code. And that includes the 2 enclosed garage spaces in every unit and 0.5 spaces per unit. There's discussion in the staff report about making sure that we meet the qualified open space standards. So we are required to provide 10% open space based on the qualified open space shown here with the hatch lines. Meeting the code, we're at 16% open space. And this is a rendering of the central open space area. The building, the site layout
consists of fourplex and sixplex buildings. Shown here are the fourplex building elevations, two different distinct architectural styles. And then shown here are the sixplex building elevations, again, two distinct architectural styles. There are 3 floor plan types within this project. And if you include the garage and outdoor porch area, there are unit size variations. With a townhome development, it's important to note that there is a great differentiation in price between an end unit and an interior unit of a building. So an end unit would only have 1 shared wall versus an interior unit would have shared walls on both sides. And shown here are interior photos of unit type A, unit type B, and unit type C. So we know in the code that there is a priority for unit variations. And so on our site, there is a great distinction with the location on the Chinden Boulevard versus interior to the site against the canal. There's distinction between interior and end units for, again, how many shared walls you share, front patio sides, and then the facade treatments. There was feedback about needing to enhance the proposed, needing to enhance the side elevations along Coffee. So I do want to note, just for clarity, going back real quick. So building 11 does front Coffee Street. Building 7 and 14 is where the note comes from, and those are the elevations that we're proposing to improve to meet those conditions listed by staff. We are required to provide 6 total sustainability points, and that'll be provided by the multi-use pathway on Chinden, easily accessible recycling area, and on-site stormwater infiltration and retention systems. We have been working with ITD to get comments. We have submitted with sufficient time for this hearing. However, there has been a decent amount of staff turnover and heavy workloads. So they are promising it the week of October 3rd, which will be prior to City Council, their review of our traffic impact study. Regarding the traffic impact study and the conclusions that are listed therein, traffic impact studies are prepared by licensed traffic engineers to be reviewed by licensed traffic engineers. And within that study by Fair Peers, they conclude that access to Chinden distributes the vehicle trips from the site, performing better overall. They also said that should Chinden access be denied or limited to ride in, ride out, or emergency access, then the existing access off Coffee is sufficient for the site traffic. And therefore, we request your recommendation of approval for the planned unit development and subdivision, and we'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant? Commissioner Brown?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Get my correct notes here. Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your presentation. How large is the total development with all the parcels involved?
7.17 acres.
It's about 7 acres, is that correct?
Correct.
You addressed the question I had with regard to ITD. So I will ask you, have you read or your engineer read the ACHD requirement and the requirements on Coffee?
Correct, we have, and we have a meeting scheduled with them for Thursday to work through those requirements.
You noted, and you're aware that they have a different requirement for the width of the street.
Mm-hmm.
And other than that, what they put in there is pretty standard, but you're aware of that.
Yes, we are.
And so I take it your engineer's prepared to take care of that, right?
Correct.
I also have another question relating to engineering. I presume that you have read the city engineer's report.
Correct, and we had a meeting with them on Monday. So we got the city planning staff report on Wednesday. We met with engineering on Monday, and we plan to address everything prior to council.
So you're aware of the requirements in there. For specifically, what I'm really interested in is the requirement for improvements will have to be made to the sewer system.
Mm-hmm.
And also to the drainage literally, and I understand it's only a preliminary plat, but there are a lot of important comments in there with regard to the drainage requirements.
Correct, and we have our engineer here tonight if you have any more specific questions, but we are prepared to work with the city engineer to resolve those things.
All right, thank you.
Thank you,
That's all I
Commissioner.
have.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown. Anybody, no other questions? Or, oh, Commissioner Shepherd, go ahead. You're welcome.
Thank you for your presentation. When I saw that you put that there was 16% open space, I noticed on the staff report, there was talk about a lot of that being unusable. Is the 16% usable space?
Correct, so it's all of the area shown on the slide that is hatched with those dashed lines. So that is all usable open space, and it meets the qualified open space standards of code.
Okay, I think I see that. So the closer to I believe it was like around Thurman Drain, it was just really dense.
Yeah, that's
That's
not included. So you'll see it here, through this area, the street frontage, and then within these areas as well.
Thank you.
Sorry, that's.
And then you did say that you're going to redesign those side elevations on those two buildings that address coffee.
Correct, and we'll return to design review to finish those
Very
elevations
good.
being approved.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, we'll hear from staff. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just use your map.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. This proposal consists of 76 two-story townhome, three bedroom townhome units. The subdivision has access off of West Chinden Boulevard as well as North Coffee Street. The proposal intends to keep the existing Thurman Mill drain untiled and to maintain the dense vegetation surrounding that area. The application proposes a code compliant 183 parking spaces. But the application is considered a planned unit development. And so staff has drafted a few waivers based off of the analysis of the packet that which was submitted. The applicant did ask for a 0-foot interior side setback waiver to code standards. But staff has also drafted allowing for a greater number of lots to be accessible off of a common drive, which is a standard planned unit development waiver to be granted. And then as well as drafting a waiver for the proposal of non-compliant parking space dimensions. Code requires a 9x10 parking space stall. They have proposed a variety of different sizes. So that can be found in the decision document. A section of the planned unit code requires that the development provides a variety of housing types. Code is specific in that it requires patio home, detached units like patio homes, attached units like townhomes and duplexes, single family and multifamily units. This application does not propose a variety of housing types in what is specified by code, but it does provide two-story townhomes of a few different floor plan varieties, all ranging from 1,674 square feet to 1,887 square feet. During the April 18th, 2022, and again during the September 19th Design Review Committee meetings, the committee had requested that the application have more variety in heights and densities. These were These comments suggested increasing the height of the structures closest to West Chinden Boulevard. Not only would increasing the height, or at least providing a variety of height and densities, help break up the long roof lines there along West Chinden Boulevard, but it would also be more in compliance with the comprehensive plan's mixed use commercial designation. The comprehensive plan's mixed use commercial designation is meant to be more urban in character, with 3-story buildings covering about 40 to 60% of the lot coverage. The issue with density, however, is the fact that the traffic impact study has yet to be received. Staff has also gotten comments from ITD regarding that they will be submitting a late submittal or a late comment for that TIS study, but anticipate having that report by October 3rd, or at least prior to the October 10th city council hearing date. As far as code compliance issues go, there are not very many. There are a lot of conditions drafted to make sure that those minor code compliance issues can be resolved at a later date. Staff would just like to mention that the trees along West Chinden Boulevard will be required to be between that 10-foot wide multi-use pathway and the right-of-way of Chinden per the city. It is not conditioned in the decision document right now. Staff is planning on at least conditioning it for the design review committee decision document, but if the commission feels the need to condition that the trees are within that landscape buffer, then that could certainly be a condition that you draft in the decision document. As far as the common open space, there was enough information to review. However, it was just not detailed enough for staff to feel confident in the review of that of the packet. So the packet had mentioned that about 49% of the site was dedicated to common open space, but a lot of that did consist of the Thurman Mill densely vegetated area, which isn't necessarily usable. So in the presentation that the applicant has presented here tonight, it looks to be that the hatched area is probably code compliant, but there is a condition in the drafted decision document to require code compliant common open space. And so that doesn't necessarily need to be resolved here tonight because it's already been conditioned. And then as far as the ACHD comment, staff is also a part of that meeting on Thursday regarding the Coffee Street right-of-way. With that, I stand for questions.
Thank you, Hannah. Questions for staff? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll open the public hearing now. If there is, I don't have anybody in the room here, I think, that wants to provide testimony on this. Okay, anybody on Zoom that wants to give testimony on this application? Looks like a no. Okay. So you do have an opportunity to to provide rebuttal testimony if you'd like.
Thank you, commissioners. We'll keep it short. I'm a very visual person, so I'm just gonna put this back up. All right, thank you for your time again tonight. I'll keep it short. So within the packet, there's discussion about common drive and private drive code compliance. So the proposal you see here is actually a service drive. type proposal. This is more common in, say, multifamily projects or or like a commercial facility. So those are the standards we're hoping to be reviewed under. But we'll continue working with staff on that for compliance. The trees on Chinden, although we understand the desire to have additional shading on the sidewalk on Chinden, we will continue working with ITD and staff to see if that's possible. Right now, that would mean that the trees, without affecting the greater plan, are in the right of way. And ITD is kind of tricky to convince to put trees in the right of way without them getting torn out in future right of way expansions. So we'll do our best to get them in there and hope that we won't be required to have them put into our site, which would greatly reduce our area. So you can see this is an odd shaped site. We're on a corner parcel, some fun triangular shapes. Sadly, our fire trucks, they like right angles. And so working that into this kind of shaped site is difficult. The right of way for Coffee Street is at an odd angle as well. So we will continue to improve a lot of exciting angles on this site. And then the trash requirements also are pretty detailed with backup and pickup areas. So this is where, every inch on the site counts. Otherwise, like staff said, open space in the report was still a little bit vague. We've cleaned it up in that late correspondence in your packet. So that's what we showed on this slide, and we'll stand for any more questions.
Any questions for the applicants?
I do.
Yeah, Commissioner Brown.
Thank you for coming back up here, and I had one that I deliberately waited on. But not this first one. The first one is, other than the ones that you mentioned, and I understand the issue with the trees and ITDs right away, and the other item that you mentioned. However, I would like for you, we do have this problem with, as you were already here when you heard me mention again about the requirements in PUD, and the wording, as Hannah pointed out, is for a variety of housing types. So I would like you to comment again on your thoughts with regard to how we should be thinking about that with regard to this particular development.
Thank you. Great question. So again, the variety includes a variety of building styles, a building repetition, a mixture of floor plans as well. And then shown here, there's a lot of natural variety in townhome products regarding site location on the site. And then that interior shared wall versus one shared wall versus two shared wall units. So we believe we are providing the variety, but are open for that feedback.
Thank you.
And did you have a second one, or you?
No,
that was it. That was it. Okay,
that was it.
And, you didn't have any. Okay. Thank you. Okay, public hearing is closed. So let's move to the discussion amongst the commission members on this one, remembering or reminding that we are recommending action to city council. We are not deciding on this one tonight. So that said, Commissioner Brown.
Okay, I've already indicated that I did have some questions, but they've been, most of them have been answered. They had to do with the issues with ITD, and with regard to that, most of the things, including the issues on the trees, I don't believe that we should put any kind of a requirement. In fact, I would like for it subject to your, before we go sending this off, that we don't have a requirement in there that would require them. The idea that they talk to ITD, that's a very good idea. And this, but ITD in those areas where they're going to, in the future, know that they may have to put another roadway in there, there's just no way they're gonna authorize it. And the other place that they're not gonna authorize them is in there, along there where they have to allow for drainage. They're not gonna allow them to put trees in a drainage swell, because that would defeat the way you build them. And so I think we should be careful and make sure we don't have something that says that. Having them look at and talk to the staff a little more about how they might provide for some additional trees if they need. As long as it doesn't require them to do that, then I don't have a problem with that. As I indicated, I have a problem with the way our rules on PUDs are written. And in this particular case, they do have quite a big area. They got 7 acres that they're dealing with. But I guess what I will say is what they've said with regard to variety. I will go along with that. So I'm feeling that I would be recommending approval.
Commissioner Montoya. Thank you, Commissioner Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the presentation. Appreciated the information as well put together. I do have some concerns with ITD and just the requirements that they're going to impose on you. And who knows what that is, whether it's turn lanes, restrictions on exiting and so forth. There has been the ongoing issue of the sidewalks along Chinden, as well as the drainage and the landscaping. So one concern that I would have is just how does that marry with the potential of having a detached sidewalk along Chinden? And if you're pushing it back interior quite a bit outside of the right of way, then what does that do to your overall site usage and an application of utilization on the site? So, but it sounds like you've had some discussions and can cross that bridge. I'd hate to see you have to start again because your use is not compatible. So I'll leave that one to itself. I do echo what Commissioner Brown says about the different types of housing, and I'm not going to go there either. So I would fall in line with Commissioner Brown on an approval.
Thank you, Commissioner Montoya. Commissioner Shepherd.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree as well. I would recommend approval. I don't believe we should put any requirements on the trees without more information from ITD. So without that, it's hard to say anything about it. But and also, I'm satisfied with the variety of housing with the different plans for the space that you occupy.
Okay, thank you. I guess the only other comment I would add is that I'm different than my fellow commissioners on variety of housing. I think there's been other applications where we've made what's the right word to use? We've pushed back pretty diligently on variety of housing on larger developments. And applicants have come back with a variety of heights, a variety of number of bedrooms, so I'm a little bit more hung up on that because the development as it stands now in my eyes is pretty monochrome, and I do think that the PUD stresses pretty, in my mind, and based on how we've acted on that in the past, variety of housing has meant, we've interpreted it to mean differing numbers of bedrooms and different heights, I guess, in my recollection, on larger developments. But I love what you're trying to do with this parcel. So that's where my brain is conflicting on this one. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. I'll say that we're probably ready for a motion, and then we'll go from there.
Make motion.
want me to try? I sort of wrote down what to say. Okay. Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Shepherd.
I move that we recommend approval to the city council on SUB FY 2022 number 5. Nicolette Womack is requesting a new construction of a townhome subdivision development located at 8373 West Chinden Boulevard, Ada County Parcel R 819-1500-522 in the C2 General Commercial Zoning District with the condition that the trees along Chinden. Well, I had written down the trees along Chinden must be in the landscape buffer, but then we started talking about, so. There's no condition on the trees, right? Because we don't have any say over that. I don't know if I can. Or can I move that we accept or we recommend the subdivision as stated on the decision?
Yeah.
And there's like the.
My interpretation of it is whatever along Shinden's right of way, subject to what ITP. That would be good, yeah. So, somehow say that.
Okay. So I move that we recommend approval to the city council with the condition that we follow ITD's approval or ITD's conditions on the trees along Chinden Boulevard. And all of the facts and conclusions.
Findings of fact, conclusions of law, and conditions of approval.
The findings of facts, conclusions of law, and conditions of approval as stated.
All right, there's our motion.
I'll second it. We both did. Take your
We'll
pick.
put Commissioner Brown down as the second on that. All right, so those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Nay. From me. Due to variety of housing. So, thank you. So your recommendation will go, our recommendation to approve will go to city council.
Good job.
Language. And have it written like you do.
Actually, there's somewhere that I have something that Jenna gave me a long time ago. Fortunately, our chairman here, he could keep track of that and fix it for us. Remind us what we have to say. Okay.
We are adjourned. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Oh, before you turn off everything, I do need to ask, do we have anything that we need to discuss? Any other? None from staff?
None from staff.
Okay, we're adjourned. Sorry.
Thank you.
Good job, staff.